Well, Caltex is closing its Kurnell oil refinery, leaving Sydney without a refinery for the first time in nearly 6 decades. Workers say the loss of around 600 jobs is devastating, but the company says Kurnell couldn't compete with mega Asian operations. Caltex is moving away from refining to importing petrol, raising questions over the country's fuel security. Refineries in other Australian cities are now in the spotlight. Andrew Robertson reports.
Aussie fuel! Aussie jobs!
When it came, the decision to close the Kurnell oil refinery was no real surprise, but unions were furious. They're vowing to do whatever it takes to keep the 57-year-old refinery pumping. Caltex had revealed last August Kurnell's future was on the line.
Our refineries are small in scale. Just to give you an idea, the average Australian refinery is about 100,000 barrels a day. The ones in the region that we are competing with are of the order of 500,000 to 1.2 million.
And they're also modern and much more efficient than refineries in Australia, which is why oil industry veteran Kevin Hughes believes Caltex had no choice but to axe Kurnell.
It's cheaper to buy the product from overseas than it is to refine it here in Australia. And the economics were as such, and they were losing so much money, it seemed to be a very sensible decision.
As he announced the closure of Kurnell, Caltex boss Julian Siegel refused to give a long-term guarantee about the future of the company's other refinery at Lytton in Brisbane. Kevin Hughes believes Lytton is not the only plant on the chopping block.
Lytton will come under pressure, as will Shell in Geelong and Mobil in Altona in Melbourne. They will all come under pressure, and it'll be interesting to see over the next 2 or 3 years how many of those survive. My tip is that Shell is probably in Geelong, probably the next to go.
As Australia moves from being a refining nation to an importing nation, fuel will need to be stored to cover any disruptions in supply. Kevin Hughes says at the moment that storage capacity isn't there.
As of April, we had 17 days cover only for petrol and diesel. Now, if we have a hurricane, a cyclone, any sort of political unrest or just a delay in shipping, 17 days is nowhere near enough to protect Australia's economy.
Transforming Kurnell from a refinery to a petroleum importing and distribution depot will cost Caltex nearly $700 million. To pay for that, it's planning a capital raising using hybrid securities, and it will cut its dividend payout ratio.
It sounds big dollars in the if at first blush, but the refining operations have the capacity and have lost $200 million on an annual basis. So really, you know, bite the bullet and get the operation back on a profitable rail.
Caltex has arguably the best distribution network in the Australian petroleum industry. And in the context of loss-making refineries, Morningstar's Peter Warren says it makes sense for Caltex to import petrol and focus on the distribution.
Kurnell really is a beautiful site for accepting seaborne cargo, and then the distribution network pushing out of there, it will be very efficient.
Caltex is half owned by US oil giant Chevron. It signed a petroleum supply agreement with Chevron to replace the fuel that would no longer be refined at Kurnell.